It's Friday, everyone. What do we do on Fridays here at the Hint Hive? That's right, we smash the patriarchy. Hello, my queens. Welcome back to the Hint Hive, Amplifying Women's Voices. I'm your host, Kelly Hint, your resident psychotherapist, feminist life coach, and your queen bee here at the Hint Hive. And today, we are going there. We are talking about sex trafficking. We are talking about sexual assault. And we are talking about the systems that try to silence women and how we burn those systems down by speaking, by healing, and by reclaiming our power. Now, before we dive in, I want you to check in with yourself. Notice your body. Notice your breath. If at any point any of this feels overwhelming, pause. Take care of yourself. Come back when you're ready. Because this conversation, it matters, and you deserve to feel safe while having it. Let's start with the truth, the reality that we don't talk about nearly enough, because silence is actually part of the problem. Globally, millions of people are trafficked at any given time, and the majority are women and girls. In the United States, trafficking has been reported in all 50 states. That means this isn't something happening somewhere else. It's happening in our communities, our neighborhoods, and sometimes even in our own social circles. And here's the part people don't always want to hear. Trafficking doesn't usually look like dramatic kidnappings. It often looks like a boyfriend who becomes controlling, or a job opportunity that feels too good to be true, or a family member exploiting vulnerability, or someone slowly isolating a person from support systems. It's grooming. It's coercion. It is psychological warfare. And sexual assault? About 1 in 3 women experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. I'm sorry, but that number alone should stop us in our tracks. This means survivors are not the exception. They are everywhere. And yet, we still live in a culture that treats these experiences as rare, as isolated, or even worse, as questionable. People, this is not rare. This is systemic. And systems can be changed, but only if we're willing to see them clearly. Let's move on to the psychology of control and silence. As a psychotherapist, I need you to understand something critical. Trauma changes the brain and the body. When people ask, "Why don't you leave?" what they're really revealing is a fundamental misunderstanding of how trauma actually works. Trafficking and assault rely on powerful psychological mechanisms, including trauma bonding, where victims form emotional attachments to abusers as a survival strategy, kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. Also, they rely on fear conditioning, where the brain learns that compliance equals safety. They also rely on shame and self-blame, which keeps survivors silent. And finally, they rely on isolation, which removes alternative perspectives and support. Add in economic dependence, threats, and manipulation, and what you get is not choice, but survival adaptation. For anyone following the recent sex trafficking ring atrocities, you can clearly see all of this when you listen to the survivor accounts. And let me be incredibly clear here. Survivors are not weak. They are responding exactly how a human nervous system is designed to respond under extreme threat. And then, society piles on top of that with victim blaming. What were you wearing? Why were you there? Why didn't you fight back? These questions don't just miss the point. They reinforce the silence that perpetrators depend on. Because if survivors are too ashamed to speak, the system stays intact. Now, we need to have an honest conversation about how culture contributes to this problem. We sensationalize the most extreme cases while ignoring the everyday realities. We consume stories of violence as entertainment, but we struggle to sit with the lived experiences of survivors. And most importantly, we still live in a world that scrutinizes survivors more than perpetrators. That one drives me a little crazy, not gonna lie. But storytelling, when done right, can disrupt that. The book Nobody's Girl by Virginia Giuffre is a powerful autobiographical account of her experience with sexual abuse and trafficking, including her involvement in elite, high-profile exploitation networks. It's not easy to read, but it is necessary. And here's why this matters on a deeper level. This story exposes something many people are uncomfortable admitting. Trafficking is not just a fringe crime. It can be protected by power, money, and social status. It reveals how systems that are supposed to protect, such as wealth, influence, and institutions, can instead be weaponized to exploit and silence. Giuffre's story challenges the dangerous myth that abuse only happens in bad neighborhoods or by obvious villains. Sometimes it happens in rooms with people society respects. I think a lot of us are learning that more and more as we follow the news. Sometimes it is enabled by silence or complicity, by people choosing comfort over truth. I'm seeing that a lot in political circles, and it's disgusting. And that's where we need to get real. Power without accountability creates the perfect environment for exploitation. And there seems to be a huge lack of accountability happening right now here in the United States regarding a very high-profile sex trafficking operation. You know what I'm talking about. I am not going to give that scumbag the honor of speaking his filthy name, or the disgusting names of the sick pedophiles involved. They can all rot in hell. Okay, sorry. Let's get back on track because I am trying to remain professional and not lose my mind, because anytime I talk about this, I can devolve quickly. Anyway, what makes this story so important is that it dismantles the illusion of safety tied to status. It forces us to confront a harder truth. Exploitation thrives wherever power goes unchecked. And silence is often enforced not just by perpetrators, but by systems designed to protect reputation over people. This is what we call institutional betrayal, when systems that are supposed to protect actually cause harm or fail to intervene. And that's why storytelling like this isn't just awareness. It's disruption. It is resistance. It is refusing to protect systems at the expense of human lives. It is saying, we see this, we name it, and we are not looking away anymore. Now let's talk about healing, because survival is not the end of the story. We can reclaim our power after trauma. I am one of the many, many examples of that one. Something to remember is that healing is not linear. It is not pretty. It is not something that you get over. It is something that you move through, layer by layer, at your own pace. And here's what I need you to hear. What happened to you is not your identity. Trauma may shape your story, but it does not define your worth. Your brain adapted to survive something overwhelming. Your body carried you through. That is not weakness. That is intelligence. That is resilience. Now, reclaiming power can look like naming what happened, even if only to yourself at first. It can look like relearning boundaries and honoring them without guilt. It can be reconnecting with your body in safe, supported ways. Or seeking trauma-informed therapy or support groups. Or it can look like allowing yourself to feel anger, grief, and everything in between. Healing also means unlearning the shame that was never yours to carry. Because let's be clear, the shame belongs to the perpetrator. Always. All right, let's move into action, because awareness without action is just noise. There are actionable steps that both survivors and allies can take, so let's go over a few of them. If you are a survivor, step 1, seek support in a way that feels safe. This could be therapy, coaching, a hotline, or a trusted person. Step number 2, develop grounding practices to regulate your nervous system. You can do breathing exercises, or use sensory tools, or movement. One of the things that I really enjoy is doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding practices. I have gone over that in other episodes. That's where you name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. For some reason, whenever I try to recall them in the moment, sometimes it's a struggle. But anyway, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding exercise is fabulous, not just for trauma, but for anxiety or any time that your body seems heightened and you need to get it back under control. Okay, step number 3, create small moments of control in your day, because choice is very, very powerful in healing. I used to be a sexual assault response team advocate, and one of the things that we learned through our training when we were dealing with somebody who had been sexually assaulted is that they have to be in control of the whole thing. We do not ever push. We do not tell them that they need to call the police or they need to do this. They have to do that. Every single step is in their control. They get to make those decisions. Because when you are a survivor of trauma, most traumas, it is a struggle to remember that there are things within your control because that traumatic event was not in your control at all. All right, lastly, step number 4, limit exposure to triggering content when needed. Protect your peace. And that's where I will caution you as listeners. If you're going to read Nobody's Girl by Virginia Giuffre, do it in pieces. It took me a little bit longer than usual to read the book because it was very triggering. There were a couple things that hit the nail on the head for me personally and some of the things that I went through. I'm incredibly grateful that I was never trafficked, because that seems like a whole other nightmare in itself. However, I'm not going to minimize my own experience just because I wasn't trafficked. And that's another thing to remember. Don't minimize what you've been through because somebody always has it worse and somebody always has it better. So that does not take away from your experience. All right, let's move on to actionable steps if you are an ally. Step number 1, believe survivors without interrogation. Step number 2, listen more than you speak. Do not give unsolicited advice. Step number 3, educate yourself on trafficking dynamics and trauma responses. It's on you as an ally. It is not on the survivor to educate you. And finally, step number 4, support organizations either financially or through advocacy in spreading awareness. That, my friends, my allies, is how you can help somebody who has struggled with trafficking or assault. And for everyone, challenge victim-blaming language in conversations. I cannot tell you enough. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to call that nonsense out. I don't want to hear any garbage about, oh, well, she should have been doing this or she shouldn't have been wearing that. Nope. If you're saying that nonsense in front of me, oh, you're not going to like my response to that at all. And granted, you don't all have to be as direct and assertive in the manner that I am. Not everybody needs to be whacked over the head. Actually, they all do when they're engaging in those garbage conversations, but you don't have to do that. There are other ways. You can challenge gently if that is your personality, but don't be complacent. Don't let those conversations happen. And another thing that you can do, that we can all do, is to advocate for systemic change through policy, education, and accountability. And like I mentioned earlier, we're having a big problem here in the United States with accountability. It is not happening. It is disgusting. And as of the recording of this episode, our former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, has just testified, or she went in front of Congress, whatever, about the files. You all know what I'm talking about. Again, I am not saying the name. I'm just not doing it because I'm being a defiant person right now, and I don't want to amplify his voice or their voices. Anyway, I find it ironic that the only person who has been brought before the authorities is Hillary Clinton. She wasn't named in the files. Her spouse was, right? So why not ask him? Why bring her in? I don't know. It just kind of feels like women are facing accountability for actions that the majority of the perpetrators were men. Okay. Shocking. Hello, patriarchy. All right. Finally, before I go off on another rant, teach and model consent in everyday interactions. This is a huge one. We can all do this. This is actually one of the reasons that I always ask people permission to hug them. And yes, I'm talking about my personal life. I never initiate physical contact as a therapist because it would be very inappropriate to do so in the majority of situations. Some exceptions included working with some kiddos back when I used to work with the little munchkins. I'm sorry, I really struggle not to give hugs when needed to kids. So It's probably one of the reasons why I don't work with kids anymore. I don't want to cross any lines, right? And in therapy, there are very, very strict boundaries that we have to adhere to. So if you've ever been to therapy and wondered maybe why your therapist doesn't offer you a hug or a pat on the knee or something in a situation where maybe a loved one would hug you or physically comfort you, it is not because we're callous and unfeeling. It is because we are adhering to the ethics of our profession. We want to keep our licenses, so we got to be real careful about stuff like that. Now, I will say, my people have approached me for physical affection. No, affection is the wrong word. Physical comfort. I have been asked, is it okay? May I hug you? This happens a lot in my coaching practice because there's a different dynamic between my coaching people and my therapy people. So there are times when it is absolutely 100% appropriate, but I am not the one initiating contact because there's a power dynamic that happens in like therapy between patient and therapist, and it's just that unequal power dynamic is not something to be taken lightly. And while I'm thinking about it, an important point here, moving away from therapy, that I feel I should make is that change doesn't just happen at the individual level, right? It's not I, solitary person here, decides to do this and so it changes the world. No, it happens when communities shift. So how do we get communities to shift? Well, we've all got to do it, right? We've all got to do these actionable steps. We've all got to do our part. We have to call out uncomfortable conversations. We have to respect boundaries. We have to set and enforce healthy boundaries. I don't think I've said boundaries in a few episodes. I'm kind of impressed with myself. Actually, yeah, okay. Maybe it was just one episode that I missed having a boundary conversation lately. All right. Ladies, my queens, it is time for your affirmation of the week. Say it with me, or write it down, or just let yourself hear it. I am not what was done to me. I am powerful, whole, and worthy of safety, respect, and love. Now, take a nice, deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. Ladies, this affirmation matters because trauma tries to rewrite your identity. It tries to convince you that you are broken, that you are damaged, that your story limits your future. But that is a lie rooted in harm, not truth. You are still whole, even if you feel shattered. You are still powerful, even if you feel small. You are still worthy, even if the world has made you question it. Reclaiming your identity is one of the most radical things that you can do in a world that tried to take your power. And every time you say this affirmation, you are pushing back against that narrative. That is healing. That is resistance. And that is power. Before we close this out, I want to leave you with this. We cannot heal what we refuse to name. Sex trafficking and sexual assault thrive in silence, in disbelief, in systems that prioritize comfort over truth. But every time a woman tells her story, every time someone says, "I believe you," every time we challenge harmful narratives, we chip away at those systems. This work, it's heavy. It asks us to sit with discomfort, to confront injustice, and to unlearn what we have been conditioned to ignore. But it is also powerful. Because healing is not just personal, it is collective. Because when one woman reclaims her voice, it creates space for others to do the same. Ladies, when we stand together, we become harder to silence, harder to dismiss, and impossible to ignore. So whether you are a survivor, an ally, or someone just beginning to understand this issue, your role matters. Your voice matters. And your willingness to see the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is part of the change. All right, my friends, if this episode resonated with you, I want you to take one brave step today. Share this episode. Start a conversation. Speak truth in a space where silence used to live. And if you are a survivor, please hear this clearly. You are not alone, and you do not have to carry this by yourself anymore. There are people, communities, and resources ready to support you, and you deserve that support. I am one of those people. Feel free to reach out if you need some help. And don't forget to join our Hint Hive community over on Facebook, where we create space for women to be heard, believed, and empowered without judgment. And as always, keep using your voice. Because your voice, that is power. And when women speak, systems shake. My fellow queens, I love you. I see you. I so much appreciate you. See you next week. This podcast is powered by Kelly Hint Empowerment Coaching, as well as Kelly M. Hint LMHC and The Cranky Counselor. To find out more about coaching services, head over to CoachKellyHint.com. If you'd like to know more about the psychotherapy services I offer to individuals within the state of New York, you can check out KellyMHint.com. And if you'd like to learn more about aromatherapy, you can check out TheCrankyCounselor.com.